Part three, I think it's the last part, and it's been going on for a bit. I think the first two parts are each about 40 minutes. I don't know how long this one will be, but it should be, I think, a bit less time. So we see the problem. We see the psychological problem. We see the socioeconomic problem. Um, but the big problem is violence. There's a lot of violence in our world, and so Gilligan comes to the question of what are the social policies that we should uh, enact or that we should have in the United States. He's talking to us that would decrease violence. And he asks the question on page 12 of your reading, and really this is the part 4 on the reading that I've passed out, and it's entitled "Some Solutions for Preventing Violence," uh, and and so he looks for solutions for this violence, um, and what does he say? Well, let's go there. And in paragraph 59, it's on page 12. He says, and I'm going to skip around a little bit, but 59 to 60 and maybe a little bit beyond, I'm going to read. I'm hoping that you would read along. He says, first, to reduce the amount of violence uh, uh, in the world means to reduce the amount of shame. To reduce the amount of shame means to reduce the intensity of the wishes that stimulate shame, which is to say, the wishes to be loved and to belong. And to reduce the intensity of those wishes that stimulate shame means to gratify those wishes by actually taking better care of each other, and especially the neediest among us, than we have been, particularly beginning in childhood, when those needs are most intense and peremptory, and the effects of frustrating them can be most permanent and ineradicable. As the poet W.H. Auden put it, he says, the poet, we must love one another or die. Or to quote the phrase that Dostoevsky, a great Russian author, says, Dostoevsky says, we must recognize that all are responsible for all. Ultimately, the way I look at this, or one of the ways I look at this, is that we're in the same community. What happens to someone in the community happens to me. We may not see it, we may not be aware of it. Sometimes what happens to others in the community happens to me by way of omission, by the path of that person not having become or done what they should have. Perhaps that person would have helped me out, or would be someone that I would learn from or benefit from. But because the community has failed, that then comes to me as something that didn't happen. Sometimes caring, the community means what does happen to me. And so we care for others. Since we're talking about violence, maybe one of the reasons we care for others in the community is because we want to be treated well. We don't want to have to worry about being the victim of violence or being the victim of shame. And when the community, I think essentially when the community functions better, we function better. And so that when, when Dostoevsky says all are responsible for all, we're really all in this together, wherever we are in the world, but certainly where we are in our country. And since I can't help going there, and I think it's fine. We're having to quarantine from this illness, with coronavirus, and and we can't ignore it. It affects us all, whether we see it or not. And we will experience it in some fashion or manner. And so, and it's the whole country. I think we either solve this as a whole country or we don't solve it. And in some ways, we solve it as a whole world, or we don't solve it, or we don't solve it well. So, this is an instance. We are all responsible for all. But let me go back a little bit to what this point is, and I am reading this sixth point as I say on this sheet. In a general sense, the solution to all of this is to love one another or die. Um, and so I've asked you three questions. What is the principle that these solutions are meant to satisfy? Secondly, what are the specific solutions that Gilligan indicates? And what do you agree or disagree with this principle and the specific solutions? The basic principle is that we have to care about each other. We have to love each other. It sounds hokey. It sounds like what some uh, hippie might say, but I just don't know how we get around that in some very specific ways. It comes down to that kind of an idea. And so let me move on. Gilligan says this in the next paragraph following 59. He says in 60, and it's such a it's such an important paragraph for you guys to get. He says, we have a horror of dependency as a nation. We act as though the wish to be taken care of and to be loved is shameful. No wonder we have so much violence. For the horror of dependency is what causes violence. The emotion that causes the horror of dependency is shame. Shame motivates the use of violence, or in other words, active, aggressive, independent behavior as the means by which to disguise one's wish to be taken care of by others and of one's wish for others' love. And the horror of dependency, which causes shame, motivates the repression of those wishes. So we don't want to appear vulnerable. The emotion of vulnerability is shame. It's frightening. And so we try to hide our vulnerability. We're tough. We can do it on ourselves, on our own. We don't need help. Help the idea that we need help shows weakness. It shows powerlessness, and we don't want to show weakness or vulnerability or the lack of power. And one of the truths, and it's really a truth. I think it's a truth that I've been trying to get at the whole term, even when we were meeting in class, is that and I've just sort of said it, we are a community, and we get our identities from where we are and who we are in those communities. Healthy communities produce healthy individuals. Unhealthy communities have a greater tendency to make more poorly functioning individuals. One of the expressions of that poor functioning is violence. There are many others, but one of those expressions is violence. And so we have to be healthy as a community. And 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 what that means is, as a community, as individuals depending on other individuals, we are dependent. We must recognize that dependency and not be frightened of it. We all need help, and some more than others. But the people who need more help than other people are those who have been placed in positions of being of needing more and of feeling more ashamed by needing more because of the way that we think about need and needing something and depending on others. So we have we have dependency even that's unequally distributed in this country. Some are more dependent. Why? Because they have they have fewer resources to depend on. They need more help. Why? Because they're placed in positions of, of helplessness, basically, of being of being actually powerless, not only feeling powerless, but being powerless. They have trouble placing themselves in the world. Why? Because they have fewer resources, and we shame people for needing help to place themselves in the world. And so what Gilligan is saying is that we need to love one another. We need to recognize our dependency, and that is what communities are about. And you take that fact of being a community, you can't avoid the expression of that, which is that we need each other as individuals. Um, so 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 to reduce violence, we have to reduce the need that gives rise to that violence, and that is shame. To reduce the feeling of shame, we have to reduce the feeling of not being loved. And that means of being rejected. And that means we have to care for people better and more. Um, and, and, and so Gilligan essentially is saying that um, it's not that we should walk down the street hugging each other, because that's not really what the need, the primary need, or the way it's expressed, the need to be loved, the way it expresses itself. We don't walk down the street hugging each other and loving each other. And so to satisfy the need to be loved, it's not that we hug each other more. Maybe that would be something. But really what he's saying is that we need to develop, and we need to um, fortify, to make stronger and more effective those institutions that take care of us, those institutions that quote unquote love us. And so the issue, and Gilligan doesn't put it this way, but I think we can say this, the issue is that in order to reduce violence, we have to develop institutions that love us and that care for us and that take better, and they take good care, and they take better care for us. And we all need those institutions. Some of us don't need them as much. Some of us have those needs satisfied in our family. Maybe we have wealth, maybe we have status or position, or the path to resources that enables us to function what seems to be more independently, whereas in reality, we have benefited from our community to a greater degree. And I don't want to get away from this idea here, and I am. We need to develop institutions that care for us. And so, what does that mean? And I want to give you this example of what it means to have an institution, or an institutional procedure that cares for people, as opposed to one, frankly, that rejects people. And the example that I'm going to give you is when I was first working on my master's degree, and started working on it in 1973 or so. I went to Cleveland State. Couldn't stay, the big school, and it was grown since then. But uh, when I went there in '73, this was before personal computers. This is before um, punch touch phones. You couldn't press a dial. You had to actually dial, rotary dial, and that's not just an accidental feature of my example. And my example is that when I went to Cleveland State to register for courses, you had to go in person on the day of registration, and you had to sign up in person. And what would happen is that you would have thousands of people coming down to going down to Cleveland State, and they had big tables lined up, and you had looked for your course area. My course area, of course, was philosophy. I'd look for that, and I'd have to stand in line and wait for a physical card to be given to me that would allow me entry into a particular class. I'd have to take that card and then go stand in the financial payment office line and sign up. But I had to fill out all sorts of forms in between. And what would happen was that there were so many people that you'd end up standing in line for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 hours. And sometimes when you got up to the front of the line, after waiting for 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours, they wouldn't have any more openings in the class that you needed to sign up for. So you'd have to quickly readjust. It meant probably getting out of line and then standing in the damn thing all over again. And what happened, as as we all experience from waiting in lines, it's an interesting property about lines. They make us feel rejected. We're impatient. We want to do it now, and it makes us feel, well, why aren't they getting to me? Why aren't they getting to me? Well, at Cleveland State at that time, when you stood in line for 4 hours or 3 hours and couldn't get the classes you wanted, you felt rejected. You felt like you didn't matter, and you were pissed. You were angry. And you were powerless to do anything about it. And that's an institutional procedure that makes people feel unloved, that makes people feel rejected. And James, it doesn't mean to. It's not the people sitting back there, administrative. Let's make people feel really crappy, and so they'll get angry and violent and feel bad about themselves. It's not like that's where we were at that time. You couldn't call in and punch a phone, phone dial. You couldn't do that. Now with computers, there are opportunities. Obviously, there are possibilities that way get around that. So you sit at home at whatever time. You look at all the courses that are available, what you need. You make your choice from the course schedule and the catalog that you get online at home. You figure out your schedule. You sign up. You pay online. If you're shut out of a course, you immediately look for other courses. You can search for all the classes that you need, and it's not one where you're made to feel like you don't matter. It's not one where you feel rejected. There are problems with it. Sometimes the way that schools work, the course that you need to graduate may not be offered that term. Um, Maybe there's some options, maybe not. It is part of the feeling of that, and I don't want to diminish that idea. But the main idea is that it is an institutional procedure that doesn't reject you. It actually gives you opportunities for inclusion, for doing what you want to do. And it's done institutionally, it's done at the community level. Um, and so what Gilligan is saying is that we need, in order to decrease the amount of violence, we need to love each other. We need to develop institutions that care for us, that love us. And that means developing institutions and procedures that include us and not exclude us or not make us feel excluded and rejected. We need them. We need institutions that include us, that bring us in. And there are just so many examples. There's student government in ways that are much more effective than 40 years ago, if there were any 40 years ago. Just to take the institution of education. There are, take something like like getting your driver's license or getting a new license plate. You now don't have to go to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles and wait in a single line for 2 hours and then find out you have the wrong forms. You get a form at home that allows you to send it in, pay for it online. You can see what you need. You can see the money. They give you the documents, and you're done in 10 or 15 minutes, if that long. It's a capacity that we have that we didn't have 40 years ago, or 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago. And so we need, and so it's another example of a procedure that includes us. And there are all sorts of other procedures. One of the other things that are needed. One of the things that Gilligan talks about is, and it's an interesting passage, and so I will actually read it. I'm going to read a bunch of this. Paragraph 61 He says one form our horror of dependency takes is a horror of what is somewhat misleadingly called welfare dependency. Because we're so horrified by welfare dependency, we as a nation do less for our own citizens than does any other democracy on earth, less to provide the various kinds of care that we all, in fact, need: healthcare, childcare, housing, support to families, and so on. It is not surprising that we also have more violence than does any other democracy on earth, as well as more imprisonment. In other words, we need, healthcare is a form of being taken care of. We are the only industrialized country that does not have healthcare for everybody. And that appears so obviously in this virus that we are dealing with. We have people that need healthcare that can't afford it because they don't have jobs that supply it through no fault of their own. They just don't have jobs that offer healthcare. Healthcare is expensive to pay for as an individual, and jobs. Businesses don't want to offer it if they can get away with it because it's expensive for them. We need healthcare going into our work, before we work, not when we get a job. And so you have this horrible virus, and some people who are sick can't get healthcare because it will cost them too much money. And so they go around sick and potentially dying, but they also go around infecting other members of the community. They don't mean to infect members of the community, but that's what happens. One of the effects of this virus is that it shows the need that we have as an entire community, as a national community, as the United States of America, for healthcare that takes care of all of us. If any of us suffer, we all suffer. Could that not be clear in this virus? And I don't mean to get on a rant, but I am. But it seems just so clear that we, we stand or fall as a community, and this virus really shows it. And so when Gilligan says we have a horror of dependency, we need help, and others need help. We all need help. That's what communities are. That's why they exist. Communities exist because I cannot plant and grow and harvest my food and build my home and take care of my family and work at a job. I mean, the complexity of our country, the complexity of any community, is that we each fulfill other people's needs. I have needs that I can't fulfill. I have needs that I have abilities that you can't fulfill. So we come together as a community to fulfill each other's needs. And if we don't fulfill the needs of each of us, then we suffer as a community and we suffer as individuals in that community. And that's what Gilligan is talking about. And it is what Audrey is talking about. We must love one another or die. And I want to say that straight into the camera because it's so important. We must love one another or die. And we are faced with that with this virus. And one of the ironic things is that loving each other in this time of the virus means not hugging each other. It means staying inside and sacrificing certain comforts because the community needs us to be apart. Will we come back together again? Yes. As they're talking about, probably in some different ways, but the community needs us to do this. And by the community, I don't just mean me or my neighbor or my parents or grandparents or friends, although I do mean all of those. We mean the businesses that get us through, the government functions that get us through, that help us at some level in ways that are invisible to us. And so again, when Gilligan says this, he means something I think very specific and tremendously important. um, based on the idea that our most fundamental desire is to be loved and to belong. And when we are not loved, and when we don't belong, when we are not members of a functioning, well-functioning community, violence increases. And so we must make our community essentially well-functioning. Um, he says, and so I'm going to read this by golly until everybody clicks this off. And of course, I won't know when we do that. But he also, well, I won't say that, but paragraph 62 is very interesting, I think. And I'm going to read um, the last paragraph in this because I think it's an interesting kind of summary. He says in paragraph 67 on page 13, he says, speaking of himself, he says, I hope that my analysis of the psychological consequences of the feelings of shame and guilt has shown how such seemingly trivial events as personal experiences of slights and slurs, chagrin or embarrassment can explode into epidemics of violence, just as the physical consequences of organisms as insignificant as microbes can have the greatest implications for public health. Gilligan wrote this in the 1980s, and actually I wasn't even aware of this line. I'd forgotten reading it now, and I was just talking about it. The physical consequences of organisms as insignificant as microbes can have the greatest implications for public health. That's what we are experiencing right now. And he continues, if cleaning up sewer systems can prevent more deaths than all the physicians in the world, then perhaps reforming the institutions that systematically humiliate people can do more to prevent violence than all the preaching and punishing that have been the main methods used heretofore by the criminal justice system, and more than all the therapy that all the psychiatrists in the world could possibly provide. Um, and and so what Gilligan is saying is that there are all forms of violence, and we must solve those forms of violence. We must somehow repair the communities. And again, I'll come to it. We must love one another or die. And I just don't think that's any clearer than it is right now. So I think this is a pretty good place to end. Um, you'll have a written piece. I will say two things if you, and hopefully you have gotten this far, that I want you to tune in two things, and I'll print this out also in the announcements. I want you to do two things. One thing I want you to do is I want you to select one idea from this I guess lecture that you thought was interesting, and I want you to either write and submit a response to it, or I will allow you to upload a video, and you can do it that way. Your video should probably not be more than 5 minutes. I want them pointed, and I want you to say something. Um, the if you're going to write, and that's fine, and at some level maybe easier. If you're going to write something, I don't want just one or two sentences. I need a couple paragraphs. A good solid half page, 2 page would be good. There's a lot of juicy material here. Pick something that you found that's interesting, and and write about it, or upload a video about it. That's one thing. The second thing I want you to do is I want you to give me your opinion on what you think about Gilligan's solutions. And for that matter, you can give me your opinion on what you think about the entire article and about the written piece that you did, and what I'm doing as a video, a series of videos now. So those two things. What do you think about it? or what did you think about his solutions, and um, uh, and choosing an idea that you write about or post a video to. All right, I'm gonna get off now. Thanks a lot for listening to this. I hope it was not too horrible for you, and love each other or die. Take care of each other. Thanks. I'll probably talk to you or somehow get in communication with you.